World Overview of Philosophy. Hi everyone! Now, which country's philosophy is the next?
Wait. Everywhere does not necessarily have philosophy. Where customs and religion are well established, people understand what to do, and are satisfied with their lives, they ask for nothing, and think of nothing.
Even if their life is terrible, as long as they don't realize there may be a better way of life, no one would dare to break out of it.
Therefore, if someone could turn people away from philosophy, and make people think about nothing, people would be satisfied with society.
That's a vicious story.
However, ancient Greece was initially a mishmash of city-states, and everyone respectively insisted on their thoughts. To unify them, it needed anti-philosophy, sophism, under its democracy.
So, the next. According to the previous lecture, in the first half of the 5th century BC, various powers united and repelled the Great Persia.
Protagoras came to Athens, from the northern Aegean Sea, during the war. Seeing politicians from the Greek city-states quarreling to get consensus, Protagoras found that people are the measure, metron, for everything. He thought that, if he could make someone the metron of metrons, the man could unify the people, and draw their power. Therefore, Protagoras became the young Pericles' advisor, as a sophist, a man with wisdom.
Who was Pericles?
He was a strategos, a general of Athens. Initially, Athens was governed by the Areopagus, a republican parliament of old noble senators. Although Pericles belonged to a wealthy and prestigious family, he started his political life as a prosecutor against conservative politicians, so he became popular with the masses. They were the soldiers who fought against Persia, and they promoted him to the top position.
Is it a plot by Protagoras? A person who is an aristocrat but denies aristocracy would be a hero to the masses.
Although Pericles was just one of the statesmen elected democratically, he could rule the entire Greek world, because Athens was the secretary of the Delian League to prepare against Persia, and because Pericles led the united Greek army and navy, and misappropriated the funds for Athens and his own popularity. So the prosperity is called the Pericles Age, or Pentecontaetia, namely, the golden 50 years.
I wonder whether he was a fraud.
He was rather a sophist too. He had a gift as an orator, and the masses supported his policy without thinking deeply. His speaking was cold but lofty, and he made up opponents, and thoroughly despised them, like theatrical plays. His rhetoric could dress even a losing battle as a victory. He was associated with many privileged cultural figures, as the Pericles Circle insisted that citizens' prosperity was the most excellent defense, and distributed free theater tickets and well-paid positions.
There was the typical bread and circuses populism. So, the next.
Pericles and Protagoras planned the expansion to the west, and built a new colonial city in southern Italy, Teruaki. Herodotus, who had fled to Athens from the turmoil in Asia Minor, moved to Teruaki. From there, he traveled to distant Phoenicia, Egypt, Babylonia, and even Crimea in the Black Sea, gathering much knowledge, and writing it down in his histories. He realized that social institutions, nomos, vary depending on the time and occasion, unlike the universal nature, physis.
Differently from the speculative philosophers, he tried to acquaint the world directly. It would be the beginning of social science.
The distinction of nomos from physis means that politics can change anything in society. Therefore, many youths gathered in Athens and wanted to become politicians. They begged Protagoras, who had made Pericles a top statesman, for the necessary knowledge to be politicians. However, Protagoras thought nothing was absolute, so he taught them how to give a good speech, and trained them to prove contradictory issues from both sides.
It was just rhetoric. Did they have no beliefs as statesmen?
A Pericles fellow, Anaxagoras, optimistically insisted that democratic diversity of opinions is a possibility for development, like seeds. However, seeing the international situation from afar, Empedocles of Sicily was pessimistic. According to him, Greece was just a deceptive unity, with different roots, fire, air, mud, and water, and it would only expand and contract repeatedly, by their love and hate.
He would mean by them the great powers at that time, Persia, Rome, Egypt, and Phoenicia.
Zeno of Elea, a disciple of Parmenides, proved the unity of the world through the contradictory argument that, if the world could be divided, that would lead to strange conclusions. For example, Achilles cannot catch up with the tortoise. However, Leucippus, another disciple of Parmenides, thought differently from his master, that nature is rather full of gaps, and only particles of atoms are floating in a void, as well as city-states.
These would seem like natural science, physis, but must have been concerned symbolically with the issue of social science, nomos. So, the next.
As feared, other polis became increasingly dissatisfied with Athenian imperialism. They strengthened their unity in the old Peloponnesian League led by Sparta, and began to break away from the Athenian Delian League. Pericles of Athens planned a pincer attack on the Peloponnesian League, and dispatched Protagoras to South Italy to seek cooperation with the Pythagorean cult.
The united Greece was divided into two conflicting factions, Sparta the land power, and Athens the naval power.
The Peloponnesian League also sent the diplomat Hippias to South Italy to counter Protagoras. Furthermore, it made the lawyer Gorgias venture into Athens to undermine public opinion with his ingenious speech. Criticism against the Pericles circle increased, and they were exiled on charges of corruption and atheism, one by one.
Conflict between both leagues gave sophists a more active risk than education, a propaganda warfare. What was important for them was not the truth, but to make the people believe in their words.
In 431 BC, a real civil war finally began. Unfortunately, the plague broke out in Athens, and Pericles also died. Athens fell into a mobocracy without its political leader, and sophists became more rampant. Cleon, a vulgar weapons maker, was a demagogue who excited people with his emotional speeches. Hippias, an ex-diplomat, deceived people with his extensive knowledge and beautiful rhetoric. Gorgias, an ex-lawyer, insisting on agnosticism, silenced his opponents. The Euthydemus brothers publicly knocked out their opponents by reducing them to absurdity.
Though the war was going on, what for did they fight in debates?
If they were rational, they would have quit the war long ago.
So, the next.
Socrates was an honest and strong citizen soldier, and challenged famous sophists in Athens. However, he was not a sophist. He instead asked them, "I do not know it, so please show it." Sophists talked about the issue with their usual know-it-all, but as Socrates asked more and more, they eventually became muddled. So he ironically said, "They understand it, less than the ignorant me." Calling him torpedo or crampfish, sophists avoided him.
Did he use the reduction to absurdity, like the Euthydemus brothers?
The sophists got stuck, only because their wisdom was half-baked. Comparing his method to his mother's occupation, he called it the work of midwifery, to help produce correct knowledge. Like his mother, he seems to have ardently believed in the old traditional Earth Mother goddess. The Oracle of Delphi, the center of the faith, said that no one was wiser than he, so he was very perplexed. At last, he realized that he was smarter in knowing that he knew nothing.
Politicians and commentators would like to propose an easy settlement, but that will often only worsen it.
Knowing his own ignorance, he followed daimonion, the voice of something like a divine spirit. According to him, only he could hear it, and it stops him from doing what he should not do. It also discouraged him from getting involved in politics. Even in argument and inference, it advised him, when he was about to say or think something wrong.
What was daimonion? Was it the same as the Earth's mother goddess?
It might be reason or conscience. Although not handsome, he was firm, and more charming than the swaying politicians and sophists. Noble youths from distinguished families were critical of those of their generation, learning under sophists, and trying to become politicians only through rhetoric. So they revered Socrates, standing in opposition to sophists, as their mentor. However, misunderstanding Socrates' daimonion, and despising even the traditional Earth Mother faith, they followed only themselves, namely, they became selfish.
So, the next.
In 415 BC, Socrates' disciple, elite Alcibiades, went on an expedition to Sicily as a general. However, accused of previous blasphemy against God, he defected to the Peloponnesian League. There, he made trouble again, and ran further away to Persia. With its strength, he attacked the Peloponnesian League, and by mediation of another Socrates disciple, Critias, he returned triumphantly to Athens.
What a crazy he was!
Not yet enough. The Athenian Democrats eventually managed to expel Socrates' disciples, but Athens was still defeated in 405 BC. The victorious Peloponnesian League conversely called Critias back, and set him, as one of the tyrants, to rule Athens and execute the Democrats. In addition, when the Persian vice-emperor started a rebellion within Persia, and requested mercenaries from Greece, Xenophon and many other disciples of Socrates joined it.
Was all of that Socrates' conspiracy?
No way, but his education was a failure. Alcibiades was assassinated in exile. Critias was also killed in battle by the Athenians' Democrats. However, Xenophon and the mercenaries of the defeated Persian vice-emperor would try to return to Athens. The Athenians feared that the Persians would pursue them. Therefore, they had to deal with Socrates and his disciples for themselves, and show their obedience to Persia.
It was terrible if Athens was to be attacked by Persia because of Socrates' disciples.
In 399 BC, the Democrats put Socrates on trial. The charge was teaching paganism. No matter what he said, from the beginning, the trial's purpose was to execute Socrates legally. His disciples arranged for his escape, but saying, "Bad law is also a law," Socrates willingly drank the poisoned chalice and died.
After all, what was wrong with Socrates? Why was his education a failure?